Mark Zuckerberg, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, all college dropouts. But before you can drop out of your studies to make your billions, you're going to start studying. And if you're a foreign national who wants to study in a Canadian university, some of the best in the world by the way, then you're going to need a study permit. So let's find out how to get one. Yes, we are here with the one, the only, the amazing Cassandra Fultz of Doherty Fultz Immigration Inc. Cassandra, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Cassandra, for anyone who hasn't quite figured out what we're going to be talking about yet, would you like to explain?
Study permits. We're going to talk about study permits, how to get one, how to come to Canada, and how to improve your education.
So if you want to know how you can study, live, and work in Canada, then make sure you stay watching. And if at any point you want some more information, just check out the description in the video down below, where you can also book a consultation with the lovely Cassandra and her team. Let's jump into it.
All right.
Cassandra, the first question I have is, why would people actually want to study in Canada?
When someone wants to better their education, when they want to get their next credential, or even to go in a different direction, there's a lot of choices, right? Do you want to study close to home, or might you want to travel abroad and lean on the prestige of a foreign school? And that's exactly what you can do if you come to Canada to study. So of course, you can take that credential, you can go back home, or even leverage it for a job in a different employment market. But if you study at a designated learning institution with a course that is eligible, you can get a post-graduation work permit valid for up to 3 years that will allow you to get Canadian work experience, and that will allow you to be eligible to apply for permanent residence.
So a study permit can kind of be the doorway to a life of Canadian adventure nearly.
Absolutely, it's a foot in the door, it's the first step.
So Cassandra, one of the questions a lot of our viewers have is the money. Like, studying in Canada as a foreign national will cost you some money, but is it similar to our southern neighbours? And you know, if not, how much can they expect? And if so, are there options there? Are there loans, grants, schemes? What can we do?
That's a good question. So the most important thing to think about is the first step of applying for your study permit. When you submit the study permit application, you have to make sure that you meet the minimum financial threshold simply to be approved. Now, what that means from an immigration standpoint is that you have to have at least the first year of tuition, as well as 10,000 Canadian dollars minimum to show on your study permit application. And again, this is in addition to having the first year of tuition. But there are also different ways to pay for it. Of course, most people end up paying out of pockets, but there are bursaries, there are even scholarships. I've had students who had full rides, international students who came to Canada truly on a full ride scholarship, which is incredible. I've actually seen language scholarships. So if you speak French, if you are a francophone, there are actually programs out there, and not necessarily in Quebec either, to basically foster the French language. So if you're coming from a country and your native language is French, or you speak French at a level of fluency equal to a native speaker, then there may be a program that you could attend in Canada for free.
That is absolutely, certainly not me, but I will brush up on my French. Talk to me very briefly and quickly, if you can, about this idea of the 10,000 minimum threshold that can fluctuate from country to country. Have we a cap on that? Is it kind of like, depends where you're from?
Nearly every country in the world, it's 10,000 bucks today. There's a handful of countries that I've seen up to $13,000 minimum that they want to see. Now, I also want to mention that's just for one single person, the student. If someone is bringing an accompanying spouse or children, you need to have additional funds for living expenses for them. So if you're one person and you're coming to Canada, 10,000 bucks is generally the rule. And again, that's minimum, so it's much better if there's more than that. But if you're bringing your husband or your wife too, or your common law partner, then you need another $7,000 on top of that. And it's also $3,000 per kid if you're bringing them.
I mean, also, 20,000 for a year is not gonna get you very far.
It's honestly not. These are minimum amounts. Yeah. And when you're submitting your study permit application, you really need to be able to explain, where is this money coming from? And is it gonna be there next year if your program is more than 1 year long? You're gonna have to be able to explain, how are you gonna continue to fund not only your studies, with tuition, but how are you going to be able to fund your lives, right?
Which incidentally brings us to our next point, which is one of the big advantages about studying in Canada, and that is that you're actually allowed work while you study.
A couple of things to keep in mind. Now, generally speaking, the rule is that you can work up to 20 hours per week while school is in session. Right now, we had a bit of an announcement recently that currently, for people currently in Canada with a valid study permit or who have already submitted their application for a study permit as of October 7th, 2022, they will be allowed to work full-time, right? Full-time while they're legally allowed to work on their study permit. Now, I want to clarify big time that this is not forever and it's not for everyone. If someone has not yet submitted their study permit application as of the time that announcement went out, it's not for you, unfortunately. It's only for people already in Canada and who had already submitted their study permit application as of that time. So if you have not yet applied, if your study permit application has not yet been submitted, then the 20-hour-a-week rule applies to you.
Right, okay, and it's going up until December 2023, I believe?
December 31st, 2023. Given the extreme labor shortage that led to this in the first place, I wouldn't be the most surprised woman in the world if they did extend it.
Yeah.
But we won't know that until December 2023, almost certainly.
Who knew that you can't predict Canadian immigration? What? All really useful information to know, certainly in your planning to live and work in Canada on a study permit. But let's backtrack a little bit. What do you actually need to apply for a study permit?
Most important thing, money talks, all right? You need that cash if you're gonna apply for a study permit. Now, I wanna be super clear. You do not need to pay your tuition up front unless you're applying through the student direct stream. All right, if you're applying to the student direct stream, then one of the eligibility requirements to use the SDS is that you need to have that money, the first year of tuition paid up front. But if you're anybody else, if you're not eligible for SDS, if you just don't meet the other requirements for SDS, you don't need to pay your tuition up front. So don't, okay? Like schools will tell you, oh, pay your tuition up front, la la la. You don't have to. You can. There's certainly nothing wrong with it. It even looks great on the application, but you are not required to, okay? You just need to have it, liquid cash, in the bank, all right? So that's number one. You need to have the funds, as we discussed, and you need basic documentation. You need your passport, of course. You'll need a photo. You need to be able to show that you speak English or French. Whatever program you're taking and whatever language that program is in, you need to be able to show that you can be successful in the program. So proof of language for sure, proof of funds for sure, and then most importantly, you need a good study plan, right? Otherwise known as a statement of purpose. So if you don't have a quality, a sound study plan, this is where applications get refused. So why do you want to go to this school in Canada? Why don't you just go to the university down the street? You know, if you're from a country with loads of universities, why didn't you pick one of them? Why do you want to go here at this program for such an astronomical cost compared to what it would cost you to study in your own country? So all of this has to be explained in the application.
Is there anything that is more commonly acceptable to say as a reason as to why you want to study? Other than you want to experience Canadian life, Canadian culture, the program might not be available in your home country or somewhere else. Are those the more common ones, or am I completely missing the boat here?
So one of those was great and one of those was not great, okay?
Oh, okay.
So Canadian life, Canadian culture, all this stuff, it's nice and all, but like, they don't care, all right? Officers do not care that it doesn't snow in your country. They don't care if you love hockey, they do not care, all right? But you hit the nail on the head with the other point, which is that this opportunity, this educational opportunity, doesn't exist in your country. And this is something that we really come up against with certain regions, with certain countries, and especially certain fields of study that just aren't available in certain places. So if that's the case, definitely want to focus on that.
Let's jump back to SDS, because some of our viewers might not know what that means. So can we explain in a little bit more detail?
So the SDS is the Student Direct Stream. And basically it's sort of an expedited way of making decisions on study permits. what you want to do is consider it as sort of prerequisites for submitting your study permit application. So you submit more evidence so that the application can be decided more quickly. So for example, instead of just showing, oh, I have this much money in the bank, you show that you've already paid that tuition, right? That first year of tuition. You have to submit IELTS test results to show that you already speak the language. There's no question there. You can only be from certain countries to be able to do this, things like that. So you have to meet, it's a higher standard, right? It's a higher bar of a minimum threshold that you have to meet in order to be eligible for SDS processing. And I want to be clear too, SDS doesn't mean you're more likely to be approved. It just means you're going to get your decision faster.
Which can sometimes help in planning other facets of your life.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also sometimes it means you're going to get your refusal faster if you did not meet the requirements the first time.
Would that help though to maybe have an appeal a little bit faster, maybe before school year begins?
No, it doesn't help at all.
Oh, wow. So
listen, once it gets to the stage where there's been a refusal and now we're going to do a judicial review of that refusal, the SDS is out, okay? It's out.
It's done its bit.
It's done its bit. It's done. It's not going to help anymore.
Okay, so hypothetically, we have gotten all our bits to apply for a study permit. What are the steps thereafter for the application process?
Okay, so first things first, you must be accepted, okay? You must be accepted to a designated learning institution. Now, when you're looking at schools, the first thing you want to do is make sure the school you're looking at is on the DLI list. The list is public. It's on the IRCC website. You can literally Google it just by typing DLI, okay? Just type in DLI.
We'll also put it down in the description because...
We'll put the link.
Yeah, we'll put the link down there as well.
But for real, you can just Google it. I do it all the time. So you Google DLI, you go to the list, make sure your school is on the list, number one. Okay, great, your school's there. But is your school post-grad work permit eligible? That is also on the list. If the school is not PGWP eligible, don't waste your money, okay? You're just spending money, like huge amounts of tuition fees, only that you won't get a work permit when you're done. What's the point, right? So don't spend your money going to a school that's not gonna allow you to get the work permit, to get the work experience, and maybe to apply for PR if that's what you decide you wanna do.
Okay.
So that's the first thing, all right? So check and make sure it's on the list. Then you submit your application for acceptance. Once you're accepted to the school, then you can use your letter of acceptance to apply for your study permit, right? You get your supporting documents together, and then you apply online. Now, if you're doing the application yourself, which is totally fine, you can absolutely do that, then what you'll do is you'll create your online account through IRCC, right? You create your account, you upload your documents, and you submit everything on there. If you're applying through a representative, then you do not do that, okay? You do not create your own account. The representative has their own account where their clients' applications are submitted directly to the government from the representative. Be careful with this because it's actually a sign of fraud if someone who is supposedly a representative tells you to create an account or creates an account for you. That means they don't have an account. It tells you they're not licensed, okay? So you should not be creating any kind of account if this is a licensed representative submitting the application on your behalf.
So if someone is to hire the services of you and your firm, they wouldn't have to apply and they shouldn't have to apply because you have your own profile.
Yes.
Everything goes through there. Okay.
That's right, exactly. So in my portal, all of my clients' applications live in my portal, right? So I have access to them. No one else can access this portal, only me. No one else can ever see it because this protects all the clients' confidentiality. And then this way, IRCC also knows this is my client, my application. They know it's from me.
So let's say that we have got our invitation from a designated learning institution. What are the next steps in the application?
So you have to determine, do you need to submit any additional documents? So certain countries, residents of certain countries, you're required to also submit a medical exam, for example, or you're required to submit a police clearance if you're over 18. Now, who is required to submit this? It depends on the country, all right? So you have to check the country-specific instructions if you're doing it yourself, or if you're working with a consultant, they will be able to tell you, okay, you need this, you need police clearance, you have to do a medical, whatever the case may be. Now, if you're applying through SDS, then the medical is going to be upfront. You're absolutely going to have to do that and submit it with the application, or you're not going to be processed under SDS. And then it's going to come time for the biometrics. Once your application is already submitted, then you'll get an invitation to come and provide your biometric information. You'll go in person to the VAC, the Visa Application Center, all right? And then you'll give your fingerprints and you'll do an iris scan, and they'll put all of this into the Interpol database, make sure you're not a criminal, and then your application will continue to process.
Right, okay. So quite a few different steps thereafter. To kind of
Lots
make
of
sure,
different steps.
Yeah, and I imagine within a very specific period of time.
That's it, exactly. So if you don't do any of these things that you're supposed to do, if you are invited to provide biometrics and you never do, the application just gets refused. Same thing if they ask you to do a medical, don't forget, IRCC, they can ask anyone to do any of this stuff, even if it's not like required as a standard for that country. Even if you're coming from the USA, they can say, yeah, no problem, go get a medical. Yeah, no problem, go bring me an FBI clearance. They can absolutely ask for this. And if you don't do it, then it just gets refused.
Wow. And then let's say hypothetically, everything's gone great, we get our letter of introduction, right?
That's exactly right. So the application has been approved, yay. First thing that's gonna happen is they're gonna request your passport, all right? So they request your passport, you send it to the VAC, all right? Send it to the Visa Application Center, and then the Visa Application Center will send it to the Canadian Embassy. You will never set foot in the Canadian Embassy. You don't go near it, all right? They will put your visa in the passport, send it back to the VAC, and then you can pick it up from there, or they can ship it to you. Once you get your passport back, you will get your letter of introduction for the port of entry by email, all right? And that is your actual approval letter for the study permit, and it will have your validity dates. You print it out, you take it with you to the port of entry. When you enter Canada, you give them that letter and they will print your study permit on the spot.
So that's what's going to happen if you get your letter of introduction while you're outside of Canada.
That's right, exactly. And also, just to be clear, if you applied on your own, then it will come to you directly through your portal, right? Through your IRCC portal. If you applied through a representative, it will come to their portal. They'll just forward it to you in an email.
Right. And how would that process look different if you were applying inside of Canada?
That's a good question. So if you're doing an in-Canada application, such as an extension, then you don't actually have to go through what's legally called examination in order for your study permit to be issued. You've already been examined at the time that you entered the country, and so your study permit will just come in the mail. And then also, it's important to know that if someone is going to be working with children or with other vulnerable populations, so if you know, okay, I'm going to school and I'm going to study early childhood education, right? Or I'm going to study pedagogy or whatever the case may be, you know that your part-time job is going to be working with kids. You're doing ECE with a kindergarten, or you're doing anything to do with kids. You need to have a medical done before you apply. You must apply for a medical up front. Otherwise, you're working without authorization. It's actually breaking the law. It's extremely important. You must have a medical in place in order to accept employment with a vulnerable population like kids, the elderly, the infirm, any kind of healthcare work, anything like that. Very important. People mess that up all the time, and it turns out they were actually working without authorization, and this can mess up their work permit. It can even mess up their PR. They didn't even know they were working without authorization. It's a big problem.
Well, Cassandra, obviously study permits might be a little bit more time sensitive in different ways. Terms start on specific dates, courses tend to run at specific times of the year. When should you apply for a study permit?
As soon as you have been accepted. Submit the application ASAP. Don't wait. Don't sit on it. This is one of the biggest things that I see. People, they will come and they'll be like, I just got my letter of acceptance. Sometimes it's late, especially during COVID. It really was taking a long time to get them. Like, these things were really held up. But now we're coming out of COVID and there's a lot less flexibility around having that letter of acceptance. It's really important that you give yourself enough time for the application to process. Because at the end of the day, it takes as long as it takes. IRCC doesn't care. if you miss your first class or first semester. It means nothing to them, okay? And if it took them so long to process your study permit application that your first semester is nearly over, you're gonna need a new letter of acceptance, right? So be prepared to get that from the school just to submit your application. So my strongest advice is just apply as soon as you get the LOA, all right? As soon as you know, okay, I've been accepted, have the application ready to go.
Hypothetically, which seems to be my word of this whole chat, the worst has happened and you have been refused your study permit. What are your options? What can you do? Is all hope lost?
No, absolutely not. We do a lot of applications for people who have tried it alone and gotten refused. It happens all the time. So, it's definitely not the end of the road, right? Because usually these refusals didn't come out of nowhere. And the thing is, when you apply using the MyCIC portal, the personal portal, it doesn't give you all of the options that are actually available. It doesn't tell you, oh, you should submit all these a million supporting documents. It's just like basic stuff, letter of acceptance, passport, photo. It's like 5 things and that's it. And then you submit and you're like, what happened? I did exactly what you said. It happens all the time. It's super common.
It's kind of crazy because with this much nuance in these applications, and I'm aware you can do it, and for some people it is financially just what has to happen, it does kind of seem crazy though not to avail a professional to help you with your application.
Well, I agree. I agree. And the only thing I would say is this. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with doing an application yourself on principle. Nothing. But let me tell you something. I have people come to me with multiple refusals. Listen, if you have already gotten 1 refusal, ask for help now. Because by the time somebody has 2, 3, 4 refusals, it's so much harder to help them, right? At that point, there's only so much that can be done. If somebody has 1 refusal and they're like, hey, I didn't expect this really went awry, maybe I need help. There's so much more that I can do with that than I've had people come to me with literally 4 or 5 refusals. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I won't say it's impossible because sometimes it can still be done, but you're only making it harder for yourself.
Cassandra, my last question for you today, and something that I think has started getting a little bit more interest, particularly with things like the express entry slowdown, and you touched on it a little bit, study permits leading to postgraduate work permits, leading to the possibility of PR. How does that process work? Is it likely statistically to go down that route? And is it a smart way to ultimately live and work in Canada as a permanent resident?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's one of the best ways, honestly. In terms of likelihood of approval, when you're going down that path, it's very high because you get express entry points just for having completed Canadian education that somebody who went to school outside Canada doesn't have. So you're already ahead of the game. And then when you get your postgraduate work permit, you start working in Canada and you get eligible Canadian work experience for PR. That's something else that other people don't have. Once you have 1 year of eligible Canadian work experience, now you're eligible for CEC, for Canadian Experience class, which is a whole other class of permanent residence application that other people who've never worked in Canada are not eligible for. So there's nothing wrong with this plan. It's a great plan.
Cassandra, that is all we have time for today. Thank you so much for sitting down with us today and letting your brain just spill out. I know I'm very grateful. I'm sure our viewers are very grateful too. If you do want to book a consultation with Cassandra and the team at Doherty Fultz Immigration, we will be leaving links below so you can get in contact directly with Cassandra herself. And there you have it, folks. All you need to know if you're interested in getting a study permit for Canada. Now, before we part ways, it is time to click that like button and punch that subscribe button. Don't actually punch it though, just click it as well. Also, if you are thinking of making the move over as a student and planning on living in the Vancouver area with experience in video making, make sure and leave a comment below as we would love to talk to you directly. Don't leave any personal information though. A lot of weirdos out there on the internet. Anywho's, that's all from me. Until next time.